on a plane back from the UK. So with being agile as we are at Data, we call it flying by the seat of our pants. I'm joined by Sadid, and hopefully I said that right because I'm terrible at pronunciation, but I'll let him jump in and correct my pronunciation a little bit later to talk about cost management policies and cost anomaly detection in Azure, which is very topical, and it's probably one of the reasons I don't do a lot in Azure because I've been burnt on it. It feels like when you open an Azure subscription, it's very much writing a check without filling in the number form. So hopefully we'll gain some tips on that. But first to news, so TechX, once again, make sure this is in your calendars and you're coming to see us on the 13th of October in Auckland with all Dickers vendors. Huge Microsoft team there, and then we'll be taking it on the road. So Zach has announced the dates for us to take the Microsoft piece or Inspire roadshow coming up. So we'll be covering the whole country from Queenstown down to Invercargill up to Whangarei. So pre-Inspire, so this isn't really a spoiler, but all of you in the SMB business that have gone down the Defender for Business piece because you're running Business Premium, there was still a bit of a hole there if we had some on-premise servers or we needed protected servers in Azure. And the Defender for Endpoint P2 licensing was a bit of a pain. But if you click on that, that will take you through to the tech community where you can access the public preview of Defender for Business Server Edition. No constraints around licensing 50 endpoints before you do that, or having to go with Defender for Cloud. So it's just in the settings. You'll see that once you've done that, it will enable the Windows Server devices. The Modern Work go-to-market, which was pre-day at Inspire, so not really a spoiler. This was yesterday, kicking off at ridiculous time, but you can click through and get the recordings there. Some really cool stuff around customer lifecycle management with Project Orland, which will be out August, October, I believe, which will give you data-driven insights into your customers as far as churn rate goes and opportunities that you can uncover in your customer database. So heavy on the Inspire, and there's a snapshot of my schedule. I'm going to take a break after this webinar to shoot down the viaduct and watch the keynotes, which I haven't seen yet, so don't spoil it. Rhonda is previously occupied, so I promised her I won't say anything that will incriminate her, but she's said that she'll come back and watch the recording to make sure. So off the leash. So something that I think is great for partners. You know, I was introduced to Surface starting at Data. I have to confess to being a HP nut, and my demo home machines tend to be HP because I like a fair amount of processing and power, and I generally add more RAM and more disk to the machines. But Surface, I'm loving it. So I think the best way to get your get around Surface is to get your hands on one. And as a registered partner, you have access to demo units. There are some conditions. I think you can only get one unit if it's less than 10K on your deals, and up to 2 units if it's 50K per reseller. But they are also available to win potential opportunities. And here I've got a bit of a snapshot of a high-end studio. And you see the pricing there is absolutely incredible. And I know you guys love frictionless. You don't want to jump in and register on a website and things. So if you click on that, find out more, that's just going to generate an email through to Rhonda and say, hey, look, I want a really hot pricing on a demo unit for my own use within the business. And you know, it'll get me familiar with Surface, and then I can evangelize it to all my potential customers. so I can sell more Surface. So click that find out more and send Rhonda a email. So without further ado, I shall throw across to you, Sadine. So if you want to grab control and come off mute, it's all yours.
Sure. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Um, as you may see, I'm based in Australia, Melbourne, so a bit chilly here. Bit of an intro. I mean, first of all, thanks for having me on this call. It's pretty awesome to see all the attendees here. Where I'm coming from is technical background. So I've been working on Microsoft technologies since 2000. Always try to keep up with the certifications and whatever requirement over there. And yeah, still in the land field of reading and studying, doing exam, and I don't know how many more years I can keep up with that. But yeah, I'm here today to talk about cost management. Just like what Paul mentioned, it's kind of um, stingy thing, when you're looking at the Azure or any cloud, typically, there's a first thing that you hear from people that cost. Something happened over there. I've seen a sudden increase. What are the things you can put in place to have a better control and manage those basically activities and get a better visibility? So this is not everything. Obviously, there are multiple methods, there are multiple innovational solutions that you can implement on your Azure, on your customers, but there are some starting points which potentially gives you a great idea where to start, how you can get a better visibility, and you can go from there and enhance it.
I think
So,
the best analogy is that, Azure is a subscription service exactly the same as your power or phone.
correct.
But it does have some controls in there that you can control. It stops people leaving the TV on and doing a whole lot of putting everything in the dryer or making massive phone calls. So that's really, we're not scared about signing up for a power bill with a power provider, but often we're a little bit hesitant to sort of go down the cloud path because there's not that certainty around price.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we're talking about cost management, first of all, what do we call cost management? I would say it's an ongoing process of planning and control of your cost. Typically starts with getting an understanding from your spending and where you are spending it. Then you identify enforcing for financial constraints and reducing cost to stay within those constraints and potentially free up money so you can take on new opportunities. So there's a constant cycle of monitoring, which then kick off a process again and again over the time as you identify anomalies or potentially take on new unplanned work. So let me give you a great example. Something that you probably, I mean, forget about these numbers. I just took some screenshots, but I think you get the idea of what I mean. A great example is you go through Azure activity. Customer wants to go to cloud. You start with leveraging Azure Price Calculator. You populate the estimate based on the architect that you feel fits well for the customer. Then you go ahead, implement it. Everything looks good up until this stage, and you get your first bill. The numbers don't line up with what you estimate. So you look at the numbers and you ask, how did that deviate so much from what I had originally planned and estimated? So this is something that you hear from greenfield deployment. Similar experience could be on the brownfield. You have an existing Azure, something goes wrong or some sort of a cost increase or cost change you will experience, and you want to figure out what happened there. How did that happen? Typically, when you see the number, you start to drill it down and do some investigation to find out what resources in your environment cause that outliers. So this is a great place where you go to your Azure Cost Management. This is a platform. I would say platform because there's a lot in it. It's free, by the way. If you type in Azure Cost Management, you would probably see that popping up, but yeah, you can go in and just, have a look. Cost analysis inside that is one of the modules. So what it does is basically showing us how we are trending for the current billing period and breaking those costs down by services, locations, and resource groups. And this tells us what we're spending on money. You can drill down by clicking on, I mean, it's a smart chart. You can, drill down by clicking on all any of those chart segments. And something at the corner is group by. So you can break the cost. You can drill down to where you're interested in. So obviously there are some views top where I mean it's like a drop down combo box where it gives you different holistic views of cost, breaks, resources. So you can get a great idea in terms of where your cost is going and where are the unplanned costs appearing from. Obviously, if there's something very clear, very normal, you can go and plan for mitigations and, you know, prevent any additional cost at that level. So cost resource view is one of the good ones. You can also look at the current billing period. I mean, there's a timeline. You can modify it based on current billing period, last 30 days, last week, um, from the beginning of the month, or you can put a time range on that. So cost by resource view looks at the current billing period that breaks cost into individual resources, and you can compare and ensure the expectations. So a great example here is maybe you left a VM on, or there has to be something that needed to be deleted, and you forgot it. So you can go in and just, delete it. Something that I like and I recommend, every partner to keep an eye on is a view which is called daily cost view. So this one is going to give you a daily rate on the past 30 days. You can definitely modify it and make it longer, but typically in the last 30 days, it will break the cost by resource groups to identify any anomalies you had in the past 30 days. So if you like to drill down further on this view, you can obviously change the group by resource to see if there's any anomalies amongst your top 10 resources.
So you can break this down to business groups as
Absolutely.
well. So
Correct.
if you've got developers that are constantly spinning up machines, you want to go back to the customer and apportion that to the dev team and say, hey, this is what the dev team is actually costing. So you can break it down on the invoicing that you're sending out. And then they might come back to you and say, hey, look, I want to put some controls around what my dev team can spin up. Because you know what
Yep.
developers are like.
Yep. So there's one more view that I like. I couldn't fit the screenshot. My apology. I'm pretty sure you can go and just simply select that. It's cost by resources. And by the time that you group them by resource group, if you're followed Azure landing zone best practices, you have organizations, you have groups, department, you can break the cost based on department, and obviously you can save it, you can export it, and if that is the company policy, you can share it with the different department and say like, here's the cost of your department. Dev is a great example. They typically fire up things. They typically deal with resources that are not permanently going to stay there, and sometimes they want to have their own separate billing to make sure they're in the budget. Speaking of budgets, accountability is the great way to control. So now you have the breakdown of the cost and you know where the costs are going, you know where the outliers are. So obviously you want to create a budget. These budgets can be set as in alerting, as in rules. So you can create them based on different scopes and obviously apply different filters. So put it this way, scopes are anything from billing, accounting, management group, right down to subscription or resource group, where we manage the apps and resources. Then you can apply filters on top of that to narrow down tracking to a specified filter and obviously their values. For example, we create a budget at the subscription scope and track those resources that cause the price to go over the board. And then we can also add the tags as a filter. And when we do this, we get a better control and better handling of the budget to prevent any surprises. So these are typically appear as in alerts. So once we set the budget, what alerts can be seen over there on the menu. So these are the rules, these are the email types that we're getting based on the schedule that we created. But something great here is adding anomaly alerts. This is something that I like as well. So in the platform, in Azure platform, there is a deep learning algorithm called WaveNet. It basically looks at all the resources, all the cost, and if it detects any anomaly, it will let you know. So a great way to, be ahead of a game before it just, goes out of control. What do we call anomaly? New cost. For example, I mean, and this is screenshot, I think it's a great example of cost anomaly. As you can, see the prices are spiking. What do we call anomaly? New cost. For example, a resource that was started and added. These type of resources like virtual machine, when you provision, they typically start from zero. And then over the time, they, increase the cost. Removing the cost is also an option. So for example, if you have a resource that was stopped or deleted, those type of um, statistics you see they ending with zero. And obviously, something that usually triggers anomaly is the change, increase or decrease. For example, a resource was changed in a way that caused the cost increase. Changing a virtual machine SKU from a normal machine to GPU enabled machines. Those those type of changes, which typically you see in right sizing activities, they they are triggering these kind of alerts.
So if we get someone, asking for a friend who goes and turns on DDoS standard and suddenly gets a alert coming through saying that I've just gone and spent $2,000 in the last day, that is why we create alerts. So when you're setting up an Azure subscription, make sure that you work with the customer to understand where you need to set these alerts. Is
Yep.
there a way of setting a hard stop on a budget?
Uh, Not really, but there are methodologies out there, which I'm gonna touch base some of them, like policies. So I mean, they're not really a control, but they're more like a policies that you put on your design. And I mean, I would say like, there has to be like, best practices out there in terms of how you want to manage it, how much permission are you giving to your users, to your engineers who are working on this environment, to provision type of resources. I do have some slides over there I'll go through. But yeah, like when you create your organizational controls, you obviously put some of those policies on top. And these type of controls, like budgeting, like alerting, they will let you know as soon as something is not aligned with what it should be. So it doesn't prevent. I mean, you can prevent it with policy before it happens, but once it's allowed, it will give you like, a visual presentation in terms of how you're running or if there is any kind of like, anomalies. So it doesn't stop. It doesn't like, stop the resource. And that's why like, having those alerts doesn't cost you anything. You can set them up. You can get like, those daily emails and literally if there's no anomalies, if there's no insights, it's working fine. It's just like, how you were expecting.
So it still comes down to basics, security, hygiene,
Correct.
control your credentials, control your roles, all the stuff we talk about with zero trust. But
Absolutely.
also template resources that assigned people can, excuse me, generate within Azure. What type of machine, what's the maximum number of machines that they can fire up. Um, you know, One of the sort of like attacks that we see a lot is people firing up cloud environments to do Bitcoin mining. Um, it went from browsers through to cloud environments. So make sure that you've got some controls around. There is no need for most organizations to fire up high GPU machines for normal dev work. It tends to be the domain of the Bitcoin miners. So maybe only one person within the organization can approve one of those machines being fired up.
Yep. Absolutely. Spot on. Looking at cost management. So I think what I said is relatively straightforward and easy to manage to get a visibility. If you have a single subscription with like, a bunch of resources, however, not every organization works like that. And like, when you're talking about putting following like, Azure landing zone, I'm pretty sure like, everyone's aware of best practices over there in terms of breaking down the resources into multiple subscriptions, creating like, identity subscription for zero trust approaches, as you mentioned, and better management. Those type of environments deserve better planning for the resources, how you want to break them, how you want to organize them. So in these type of platforms, you would typically deal with like organizations or departments. You're looking at applications. Businesses want to know like how much does it cost to run SAP with all resources, all dependencies over there, or environmental resources. AVD, for example. Someone has AVD, they want to know like what is the cost of AVD all up in terms of having whatever dependencies there. You know, uh, Backups, disaster recovery solutions, any kind of analytics, any kind of virtual machines associated to that specific solutions. So in these type of platforms, it's a bit different. Like, you need to be more creative over there. However, like, um, billing accounts is typically something that you can set, you can play, and basically break it down into every organization's, every department's receiving its own billing. This is something um, I don't know how it works in CSP, but if you have like something like that, you can go there. That's the tool. You can set up like different. billing for different departments, and you get multiple billings. And CSP obviously, like you get one bill. So something here that. Yep, cool. Management groups. Um, I I would question an environment that is not using management group today, because we know Azure can get very complex. um, Lots of services coming up, lots of groups, lots of locations, which is part of the growth of every organization. So, management group is perfect, especially if you want to break it into levels, into permissions, breaking down from zero trust perspective and just better management capabilities. Obviously, every management group can get its own policies, can get its own role assignment, and relatively straightforward when you're looking at the management and ongoing management. Tags also are heavily recommended, because literally anything that is not part of billing accounts or management groups, you can define tags, you can group the tags, and as we said in that budgeting field, you can filter down based on tags. You can, tag different resource groups and get the reports. Tags can be used anywhere in the Azure. So pretty much all the resources can talk with tags and can read and say okay, we're talking about these specific resource group. This tag could be as simple as who created this. Could be as simple as um, where it belongs to, but different use cases. Please go ahead and use these great features included on every deployment. We mentioned policies. I will touch base. It's a topic by itself, but as you know, policies are helping to enforce organizational standards and to access compliance at scale. It goes hand in hand with management group, and it takes care of boundaries of your deployment as it scales. Common use cases, just what Paul mentioned, but it could be implementation governance, it could be resource consistency, regulatory compliance, security, cost, and obviously management. So when we're looking at the cost controls, you're more than welcome to define custom policies and definitions and just set some triggers around them, but which will take it to the next level and advanced level. But there are a lot of good built-in policies in the platform, which you can simply go ahead, enable, and get the outcome. Some of the great ones that I like are allowed storage account SKUs. To give you an example, imagine if by mistake someone provisions a GRS type of storage where LRS is the intention, or allowed resource type, just like what we discussed. You don't want everyone to go in freely and just modify resources and just change the express route SKU from meter to unlimited premium. Locations also, if someone starts putting a resource or data outside New Zealand or Australia, where the business has a restriction in terms of keeping the data local. Virtual machine SKUs, you can restrict it. You can say don't show these type of machines to my engineers to provision by mistake. Prevent a mistake. Put it this way, accidental provisioning. And obviously tags. You can enforce the tag to every resource that you're implementing. These policies can be applied at the management group, and obviously you can create multiple management group. You can create it like a hierarchy management group, and assign different policies to different groups, and eventually get a better result. have a look at that sample policy that I put in there. I don't know, Paul, do we share these slides, or do I need to put this link separate on the chat?
No, I'll share the slides
Fantastic.
later in the chat. It will be end of today because I've got to jump
Okay.
on it, and we're pretty much up against time. So
Oh, sorry.
if we
Last
just wrap
thing,
up,
I'm
yeah,
gonna wrap it up quickly. Sorry.
yep, no worries.
Pretty sure everyone's aware of Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. So when we're talking about cost management, it's one of the disciplines, one of the 5 disciplines that we have over there. We use cost management activity to control the spending, to have a better budgeting, have a monitor, enforce rules, and basically prevent or detect any anomalies over there. Where it ends up is a better value, better experience for the customers in the Azure, and obviously less headache for the partners to manage them. Final word, there are multiple tools inside the Azure. They're all native, doesn't cost you much. I mean, it's just free. You just have to go and enable them. I'll pick two, Azure Cost Management and Billing and Azure Policies hand in hand. By the time that you enable, you can see you can cover a lot of topics that are very important from the cost management. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening to me this morning and pass it on to Paul.
Thanks, David. And as you can see, that there is a whole lot around that, and that's why you have Data Australia and New Zealand. So feel free to reach out to the respective teams, and I suppose that sort of brings us to going forward. Next week is our wrap. We're already in the planning stages. I suppose we can sort of reveal that for the next season, which will probably kick off August, September. But we will probably be moving the time to 11:30 because we're going to be doing Trans-Tasman stuff moving forward. So it will be Data as a whole, Australia, New Zealand. In the spirit of Trans-Tasman rivalry, we'll see how your rugby team goes. I know there's some people over there. So next week, we're going to wrap it up and give away the coffee machines. But for this week, congratulations to Mike. I'm sure that you'll use that apron to good effect with your Bryce and Murray from Platform Plus. So we'll hang on the call after I've finished doing the recording. But if you have any comments, feedback, suggestions on what you'd like to see for the next upcoming season, feel free to drop us an email to the New Zealand one, which is onpoint@dicadata.co.nz. And Mike and Murray, if you could send an email with delivery addresses through to that email as well, I will check that later today. And if you want to review the recordings or any past recordings, feel free to jump into the Dicadata New Zealand YouTube channel and make sure you like and subscribe. The newsletter, which reminds me I've got to write the blog this week for the next one. If you want to subscribe to that, click on the bottom there. But I shall now stop recording. So if you have any questions, feel free to come off mute or just drop them in